Moving on to black. Barrier of Bones is a 1 mana 0/3 defender. When Barrier of Bones enters the battlefield, surveil 1. This might be a card you sideboard. I think that there are better options, but if you are in a slower black deck and you want to survive against aggressive strategies, this may help you do that, and it like surveils to smooth out your draws moving into the mid game. Probably not something you want to play in constructed, but as a sideboard option, people have played roughly as bad cards in like Jaddy Offshoot and stuff, although actually Jaddy Offshoot was way better. But probably not, but there's some application. Bartizan Bats. It's a 4 mana 3/1 flyer. Yeah, it is. Blood Operative is a 3 mana 3/1 vampire assassin with lifelink. When Blood Operative enters the battlefield, you may exile target card from a graveyard. Whenever you surveil, if Blood Operative is in your graveyard, you may pay 3 life. If you do, return Blood Operative to your hand. This is another card that can go in that aggressively oriented surveil deck we were talking about. It's also a card that can just be played in a Golgari deck with Citrus Supplier as a card that you get back for milling it over. This card is pretty strong. It certainly fails the Chain Whirler test to some degree. If Chain Whirler ends up being prevalent, I'm still not sure whether or not that'll actually be the case. But outside of that, Blood Operative actually seems like one of the stronger graveyard payoffs in the set. Just the fact that you can get it back for 0 mana is a big deal. And it has lifelink, so it can like pay the cost itself. Like you just keep recurring this and you can keep blocking with it. The fact that it can block is a big deal. So I'm really high on Blood Operative. It's a card that I personally want to play a lot of in various strategies. Again, either as like that Dimir mid-rangey aggressive thing that cares about surveil, or just like in Golgari because you're milling over a bunch of stuff anyway. Burglar Rat is a 2 mana 1/1 rat. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. Oh, we get a Ravenous Rats. Okay. This is it's kind of like an inverse Elvish Visionary that there may be something that cares about this card. Like, for example, there's a card that brings back 2-drops. Maybe this is one of the better value 2-drops you can bring back. I certainly hope not. But just a value 2-drop like could have applications in certain shells. I wouldn't rule it out on its face, but certainly I hope that there's better stuff to be doing. Also, this card is a bit of a liability against a green card we will get to later. Child of Night, 2 mana 2/1 lifelink. Yep, just baseline good 2-drop for limited. Creeping Chill. This is an interesting card. Creeping Chill is a 4 mana sorcery. Creeping Chill deals 3 damage to each opponent and you gain 3 life. When Creeping Chill is put into your graveyard from your library, you may exile it. If you do, Creeping Chill deals 3 damage to each opponent and you gain 3 life. So this is another card that could again go in the surveil deck, because if you're already aggressively oriented, you actually care about the burn. And you kind of just get to free roll it alongside surveil, potentially. If you draw this card, certainly quite a bit worse, although non-playable, but close. So, obviously, you're going to be playing this in a deck that mills over its top cards pretty frequently, be it through surveil or whatever. I would certainly recommend playing in a deck where the burn matters, where like you're pressuring them with creatures, and the 3 damage may give you home. Help you win a race, etc. So, this isn't out of the realm of playability. It's probably not something I would go to, but it depends upon what the surveil decks look like, how much agency you're able to have over the top card of your deck, how often you can mill this, etc. So we'll see how that develops as the format progresses. Dead Weight! I didn't see this until just now. Dead Weight is a 1 mana enchantment. Enchant creature gets -2/-2. This is actually a removal spell that I have played a bunch of in the past. This has certainly showed up in Constructed. Especially now that we do not have Fatal Push, there is a bit of a void at 1 mana in black, and it looks like Dead Weight may be the thing we're doing. Dead Weight certainly quite a bit worse than Fatal Push, but different formats have different paradigms. Black probably got stuff elsewhere. Like what what colors are good at shifts a bit from rotation to rotation. So this is probably going to be your 1-mana removal spell of choice going forward. It's possible there's another better option. There are other cards there are other 1-mana black removal spells that aren't necessarily turn 1 removal spells. This is a turn 1 removal spell. And it's honestly not one I would be too sad to play. Deadly Visit. Deadly Visit is a 5-mana sorcery, destroy target creature, surveil 2. This is going to be the premier removal spell in limited. This is actually incredibly strong in limited, but there are much better options, or actually strictly better options for constructed moving forward. Doom Whisper. Doom Whisper is a 5-mana 6/6 Nightmare Demon with flying and trample. It also has the ability to pay 2 life to surveil 2. So this would be the top end of that Surveil Matters deck that we were talking about. The fact that you can play Doom Whisper and then surveil a bunch, pumping your Phantasms and Spy Bugs matters, gives this an initial impact. This is not a card that I would really want to play as like... This shouldn't be the first creature you're playing in the game. I don't think that you want to be doing that. The fact that it has no drawback makes this card look better than it is, because you have to understand that the fact that it is a 5-mana creature that doesn't impact the board immediately is a drawback. The way Standard works in the year 2018, like things that cost 5 or more mana really need to like heavily impact the board the turn they come down. And this is big, it's going to block most things, but it's just very vulnerable to removal. The thing you need to do to make this card actually impact the board initially is have those lingering Phantasms and Spy Bugs in play, so you can surveil, pump them, and then this impacted the board regardless of whether or not they had removal. So if you're doing that, I think this card is very powerful. If you're just playing it in more of a traditional Jundi mid-range deck, I'm not entirely sure that this card is going to be that good in that shell. Dowser of Lights is a 5-mana 4/5 without any other text. Seems medium. Gruesome Menagerie, this is a much more interesting card. Gruesome Menagerie is a 5-mana sorcery. Choose a creature card with converted mana cost 1 in your graveyard, and then do the same for creature cards with converted mana cost 2 and 3. Return those cards to the battlefield. This is a really sweet build-around card that I'm actually very interested in building around. The power level of this card is actually very high if you can like enable it properly. Being able to get 6 mana worth of creatures for 5 mana, especially when they're across 3 bodies, and get to do whatever value triggers, and you're picking them from your presumably very full graveyard, so you actually have some level of flexibility in what you're getting. This card is, to me, reminiscent of Collected Company on a rate basis. Obviously not as powerful as Collected Company for various reasons, but the dynamic of being able to like get more, like multiple creatures for more mana than you're playing for the spell, like that same thing exists with Gruesome Menagerie, albeit at a lower rate. So I'm pretty excited to try and build around this card, and like try and find what's the best 3-drops and 2-drops to get. You'd obviously want to be playing cards like Thorn Lieutenant that are good in the late game, or other cards we'll get to later. I can't explain them right now. But any 2 and 3-drop or 1-drop that has an applicable effect at all stages of the game, having like those be the things you get back with Gruesome Menagerie makes this card very powerful. Whether or not we will have enough of those, we will see. But if there are like 1-drops that will have like Kicker, Get Better Later, and 2-drops and 3-drops, then this card becomes quite strong. Hired Poisoner is a 1-mana 1/1 Death Touch. Pretty standard stuff. A pretty basic card. Generally has been limited, or medium and limited. Crawl Swarm is a 5-mana 4/1 Insect Warrior with flying. You may pay 3 mana and discard a creature card. Return Crawl Swarm from your graveyard to your hand. Not something I'm interested in for constructed. You're essentially turning whatever creature into a Crawl Swarm, and if there's stuff you actively want in the graveyard, like for example the Blood Operative, then you're kind of free-rolling this because you just get back the Blood Operative and keep doing it. But the thing that you're getting is a 5-mana 4/1 flyer. So in constructed, that's not very good. But in limited, that's actually quite strong. So if this effect was on a card that had a more respectable body, I actually wouldn't rule it out of constructed, but it is not. Lotleth Giant. Lotleth Giant is a 7 mana 6/5 zombie giant with Undergrowth. When Lotleth Giant enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target opponent for each creature card in your graveyard. This card seems nutty. We've seen how much self-mill there is present in this set. You can churn through your deck pretty quickly. If you have a high creature density, you're going to have like double-digit creatures in your graveyard. And then you can just play Lotleth Giant, and Lotleth Giant is presumably going to do lethal damage to your opponent's face. You could also reanimate Lotleth Giant. There are reanimation spells that we will get to later, so you don't have to pay the full 7. That is the main obstruction to this card, is how expensive it is. But if you can cheat around that with reanimation spells, now we're talking. So my inclination is that Lotleth Giant will show up in some turbo graveyard strategy. There's certainly a lot of graveyard interaction. There's a lot of ways to deal with that. But it's certainly worth giving a shot because the upside on this card is massive. Whether or not it ends up being too fragile of a strategy, that's certainly possible. But this enables some very powerful things if people are not prepared to deal with them. Mausoleum Secrets is a 2 mana instant with Undergrowth. Search your library for a black card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. So this is a very interesting and conditional tutor. If you have a bunch of creatures in your graveyard and you have your deck set up where you have a bunch of utility black cards, this is pretty good. I think that this card has the potential to be quite strong. This is a card that's hard to evaluate without seeing how you want to shape decks and like what situational cards are good and how often those situations come up and stuff. How hard it is to get this to like 2 or 3 or 4 creatures, how much you want to do that. So there's a lot of stuff with this card that you can only really figure out after playing for a bit. But it's hard to say that a 2 mana tutor just like has no shot at being played and constructed. Even as conditional as this is, I think that it is likely we see this card played at least a little bit. This is certainly a card I could see you playing like as a 2 of in a Golgari deck. The thing to note is there are a few of these spells that care about having creatures in your graveyard, Undergrowth spells, and when you play more of them, you actually cut into their own effectiveness. So the Undergrowth cards want a high density of creatures in the graveyard, which means you want to have a high density of creatures in your deck, so that when you mill yourself over, you're hitting mostly creatures. If you play like too many of this, and like some of the removal spells we'll get to later, and like the Resurrect, the 1 and 2 and 3 drop card, then your like creature density isn't high enough to make those cards actually good. So the diminishing return this has with the other Undergrowth payoff cards is notable and does cut into this card's power level. But if you can find the right mixture, I think this card has the potential to get like 2 slots in a Golgari deck or a Dimir deck or what have you. So I think this card definitely has a shot. It's hard to get into specifics without having played the format yet, but I would be shocked if this card just ends up not being played in anything. Mephetic Vapors is a 3 mana sorcery. All creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn, Surveil 2. This is a very narrow sideboard card, but when it's good. Getting to sweep your opponent's board and Surveil 2 is pretty good. I wish that this was 1 mana less, but if token strategies are a thing and black is strapped for ways to deal with them, which they aren't, we'll get to that later, this might be a thing you bring in, but based upon the cards I know that are coming up, I don't think that will be the case. Midnight Reaper. Midnight Reaper is a 3 mana 3/2 zombie knight. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Midnight Reaper deals 1 damage to you and you draw a card. This is actually pretty much a card that has already existed in Grim Haruspex, which was played in a very, very powerful deck, the Rally the Ancestors, that was powerful for reasons that did not necessarily pertain to the power of Grim Haruspex. But Grim Haruspex was good in it. We'll have to see what kind of enablers are around for a card like Midnight Reaper. We've seen some sacrifice synergies with like the ravenous rats and all that. So if there are enough things you kind of actively want to die or can get value, and then you could like sacrifice profitably, then Midnight Reaper is probably going to get a few slots in decks like that. The question is not whether or not Midnight Reaper is good. Midnight Reaper is totally fine. It has a pedigree of being a constructed playable card. The question is whether or not the tools exist in the format to make the kind of deck that Midnight Reaper is good in. That I'm not too sure about. So we'll have to see how things develop and what tools we have available. Moodmark Painter. Moodmark Painter is a 4-mana 2/3 human shaman with Undergrowth. When Moodmark Shaman enters the battlefield, target creature gains Menace and gets +X/+O until end of turn, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So this is obviously like a pretty strong limited card because your opponent could just be dead. It's not something I really want to play in Constructed. Like, if I want the kill you with the card that cares about how many things are in my graveyard card, we just saw Lotleth Giant. I think that's the better option. But for limited, like, this is the limited version of Lotleth Giant, essentially. Good and limited, but if we want to do this in Constructed, we have Lotleth Giant. Necrotic Wound. Necrotic Wound is a 1-mana instant with Undergrowth. Target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. So this is one of the cards I was talking about with Mausoleum Secrets, where you have diminish and return on them. So Necrotic Wound is obviously a very powerful card. It can be a 1-mana removal spell that just keeps scaling up and like just kill anything and exile anything. It can't really be played on turn 1. That's what I was referring to before with Deadweight, where Deadweight can actually kill stuff on turn 1. Necrotic Wound can't. You have to do a bit of work first, even though it is pretty efficient moving into the mid and late game. This is certainly a card that is going to see a lot of play. This is going to be like one of the defining removal spells in black in the format. It's just a question of how much you choose to enable this, finding the right balance of creatures while still maintaining a functional deck and making this card powerful. That's like a cool balance and a cool puzzle that people are going to have to solve moving forward. It's also notable that this and other removal spells we'll get to later incidentally exile. So there actually is a lot of incidental graveyard hate in this set. We've seen it with like Blood Operative and now this, and there's like some red removal spells later that also incidentally exile. So there's just a lot of incidental things that cut off a lot of graveyard synergies. So it allows them to make the graveyard synergies as powerful as they are. And it also prevents cards like Rekindling Phoenix to continue to be oppressive, which is great. I'm here for that. Awesome. Sweet stuff. So yeah, Necrotic Wound is going to be like one of the premier reasons to be doing Undergrowth things. The card is quite strong. I'm just interested to see what kind of balance people find to play like this and the right number of creatures and like Mausoleum Secrets, etc. Great card named here. Never happened. 3-mana sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from that player's graveyard or hand and exile it. So this is half of a Doomfall, which based upon cards we'll see later, you have better options available to you. So this is mainly going to be relegated to limited. One of the strengths of Doomfall was that it could affect the board later. This card does not have that same flexibility. And Doomfall was also, even in spite of that, still situationally very poor in various stages of the format. So not really going to be playing Never Happened. It will be like this card never happened. Pilfering Imp is a 1-mana 1/1 imp with flying, and you can pay 2 mana and tap it to sacrifice Pilfering Imp. Target opponent reveals their hand. You may choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card. Activates his ability only time you cast a sorcery. This is really good. So, like I was talking about before, with the Menagerie card, that you want like 1-drops that are good later, and this is like a 1-drop that is good later. It also even like protect, like you can use it to protect something and then get it back. The fact that it's Thoughtseize on a creature, obviously it's much worse rate than Thoughtseize. You have to pay 1 up front and it has to survive, and then you have to pay 2 and tap it, and then you get your Thoughtseize. But the fact that it is a creature, like, again, we were just talking about how you need a certain creature density in your Undergrowth decks in order to enable the Undergrowth cards, so any creature that acts as a spell gains additional value in that respect. And it has good synergy with the get back 1, 2, and 3 card, because this is something that is good later in the game. it gets value at all stages. So this is a card I would certainly expect to show up in certain things. It enables a lot of stuff, even though it itself on its face is not the most powerful thing in the world. It just also curves into itself. Like you can just play Pilfering Imp and then turn to Thoughtseize them if you want to. If not, attack for 1, do something else. Just having that option is really good. So I like this card quite a bit. I think this is pretty strong. Plague Crafter. This is another pretty good card. 3 mana, 3/2 Human Shaman. When Plague Crafter enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Each player who cannot discards a card. So this is just a better Fleshbag Marauder, like a much better Fleshbag Marauder. And Fleshbag Marauder has been pretty good at various points. So this is, again, another creature that acts like a spell, but still contributes to your creature density to enable undergrowth things. So you're getting a creature removal spell. So this is another great card for the undergrowth archetypes. And just kind of a good card in general if you have like any graveyard creature stuff. So Fleshbag Marauder is a card that has a decent pedigree in Standard. It's been good at various points, and this card is just better, like, for various reasons. I don't know why it's so much better. I don't feel like that's necessary. So what exact shell this goes into, we'll see. But this, on just power level basis alone, is certainly good enough to see a good amount of Standard play. I'm actually pretty excited to play a lot of Plague Crafter moving forward. Price of Fame. Price of Fame is a 4 mana instant. This spell costs 2 less to cast if it targets a legendary creature, and it destroys that creature and surveils 2. This is a spell I actually think will like intermittently show up in Standard, depending upon the density of legends in the format. This is a main deckable card. So say, for example, you're hitting legends with this like 40 to 60% of the time. In those cases, it's an incredibly efficient removal spell. Like an incredibly efficient removal spell. And then in the fail cases where you're killing other stuff, it's still the same mana efficiency as Vraska's Contempt, and you're getting a Surveil 2, which is very strong. If we end up living in an environment where it doesn't matter as much as it has mattered to exile things, like we don't have Hazoret, we don't have Scarab God, Rekindling Phoenix is a lot of other stuff to contend with that makes it harder to play that card. If it's okay to just be like destroying things and then using your other incidental graveyard hate to stop graveyard interactions, then Price of Fame is actually just a very good card because of this incidental Surveil 2 on the back end, and then it's very efficient against like the various legends like Aurelia and the guild leaders we'll get to later down the line. So I don't like, this isn't like better than Vraska's Contempt or whatever, but it situationally can be based upon what you're looking for and how the format shapes up. Ritual of Soot is a 4 mana sorcery. Destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less. So black finally gets its conditional sweeper back. We've had like Languish in the past. Crux of Fate. It's been a minute. Ritual of Soot in particular is an interesting one because it can't trade up. For example, like Languish, which was 4 mana minus 4 minus 4, killed a lot of 4-drops and 5-drops. It actually did prevent your opponent from extending onto the board in the way they would normally want. It was a card they really had to consider. Ritual of Soot, they could just kind of like play it like the 2-drop, 3-drop, and then play a 4-drop, and you can't really clear the board with this. This may be relegated to more of a sideboard card, and to be fair, it's a very powerful sideboard card against the decks it's good against. Like, very powerful. But I'm not sure that this is going to have the same role that cards like Languish did, where you could main deck it. It's possible that based upon what the format ends up looking like, that you could main deck this. It is a reactive card. Its power level is largely contextual. But based upon how things are shaping up currently, and the fact that, again, this cannot trade up, lead me to believe that this is mainly going to be a powerful sideboard option against the Boros and Celestia decks. Severed Strands. Severed Strands is a 2 mana sorcery as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature. You gain life equal to the sacrificed creature's toughness and destroy target creature an opponent controls. So this is better Bone Splinters. I don't hate it. Again, it depends upon how much like sack fodder we have, how many dudes in play that we want to kill, like are in play, and how hard up we are for removal like this. This is probably going to be mainly for limited. We've seen a lot of really strong removal so far. I don't think you need to go this route to Severed Strands. But if there are creatures that, again, you like actively want to kill that give you solid benefits for dying, and then the downside of Severed Strands becomes an upside, then that's when you would go to Severed Strands. I don't think we have a high enough density of creatures like that to justify Severed Strands, but keep an eye on that, like as sets move forward, or like I missed stuff or whatever. That's where you would actually play as a constructed, though, is like when you want the sack outlet, when that like is an actual benefit to you. Spinal Centipede is a 3-mana 3/2 insect. When Spinal Centipede dies, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. Pretty limited medium card. Medium limited card. Undercity Necrolisk is a 4-mana 3/3, and you can pay 1 mana to sacrifice another creature. Put a 1/1 counter on Undercity Necrolisk. It gains menace until end of turn. Activate this ability only when you can cast a sorcery. So this is a sack outlet, presumably mainly for limited. It is like, it can get pretty large. I wouldn't totally rule this out in constructed, although probably it's a 4-mana 3/3. But if you really want a sack outlet, this may be one of your better options. Hopefully not. But it is a sack outlet, and usually those are generally hard to find. Veiled Shade is a 3-mana 2/2 Shade, surprisingly. You can pay 2 mana to give +1/+1 until end of turn. Pretty solid limited card, maybe. Actually, I think the Shades are bad now. Kind of off Shades. I'm going to say it's bad, but in any case, it's for limited. Vicious Rumors is a 1-mana sorcery. Vicious Rumors deals 1 damage to each opponent. Each opponent discards a card, then puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. You gain 1 life. So this is a really weird Raven's Crime. Not really a card I want to be playing. Just a discard thing. I'd rather play the 2-mana Rat. Rather a 1/1 than like the mill and gain life and stuff. The mill might help them. Whispering Snitch. Whispering Snitch is a 2-mana 1/3 vampire rogue. Whenever you surveil for the first time each turn, Whispering Snitch deals 1 damage to each opponent and you gain 1 life. I'm not sure why this card needed to be limited to for the first time each turn. I feel like this card would be good if it just kept happening. The fact that it's limited to 1 per turn make this card quite poor. So it's not something I would like to play. There's a 2-mana 1/3 that like has surveil synergies. Maybe it garners a spot or 2 in the Surveil Matters deck, but there appear to be a litany of better options.